Next question here, which actually is a question we seeded a while ago, but we're tired of seeing it on our list. And the question is, do you need to aim to sound like a native speaker? We have a lot of people that, or even just in the entire language learning community, whose goal is native level or to sound like a native or something like that. And we wanted to talk a little bit about it. Do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think people who ask this question, or rather, people who say I want to sound like a native speaker, don't actually know what that means. A, in terms of like, what do you mean by a native speaker? And B, in terms of what does it take to become a native speaker? Native speakers have a pretty substantial advantage over you just because they live their entire lives in the language and have for decades.
So that's a slight advantage.
Slight advantage. And you're talking about not just the language at that point, you're talking very much about culture. And so it's effectively impossible to become a native speaker at that level unless you really dedicate the time and energy to it over the course of decades. But you can sound like a native speaker in the sense that like your accent can be very close to a native speaker. Your phrasing can be close to a native speaker. That's a much more achievable goal. And I think that's what a lot of people actually want. They don't actually want to be at that high level. Though I will say, I think Matt sort of pursued that actual native for a little while, so it's likely why he is so good at it.
It's interesting. It's definitely an interesting question. I'm interested in like knowing if it's possible, basically. But I definitely see there being some very important different like phrasings here.
Yeah.
Because right, there's what the question down here says, do you need to sound like a native speaker? But then there's also, do you need to feel like a native speaker? Or do you need to, or do you want to be native level? There's so many different like subtle phrasings that are vastly different things, right? Just sounding native is mostly a performance thing. You can do it with, it is hard, like you have to do practice and do really good, have good speaking, pronunciation. You probably need to practice phrasing, a bunch of different things, but you can sound basically identical to a native speaker with good dedication. Feeling like internally as good at your target language as your native language is so much, like it's miles and miles past that.
Yeah.
Like it requires probably tens of thousands of hours in the language, especially living in the language, just doing mundane, normal things. You have to know how to express basically everything that you come across. Feelings, physical things, actions have a way that you would say them. You just have to experience so much of life because our lives are so innately tied to a language, which you can do. People have done that. People have even like sort of completely forgotten their past languages. And really that is the language that they command the best. But it is a very different thing than like learning to do that. You have to like convert your life to that from what I've seen.
So I would actually say in response to the original question, not only should you not aim to sound like a native speaker, like not only do you not need to sound like a native speaker, most people should not aim to sound like native speakers. Yeah. Because the amount of time that it takes to do that is so enormous that if that's your goal, you're talking about dedicating your life to it. And maybe you do want to dedicate your life to it, and like more power to you, but the vast majority of people do not want to dedicate their lives to that. It's not a good use of their time. So yes, you can aim for that, but I think most people, when they come in and say, I want to speak like a native speaker, I want to sound like a native speaker, that's my goal, that's my target, are biting off way more than they can chew. Oftentimes it's their first attempt at learning a language, and so they really have no idea what it's going to take to get there. And it's like, prove to yourself that you can get to like functional fluency and then decide whether you actually want to be a native speaker or not. Once you've put in 1,000 hours, then you can decide whether you want to put in another 2,000 or 3,000 or 4,000 hours into a language.
Exactly. I wrote a little bit about this morning. Actually, somebody asked like why are people fixated on this idea of native level? And I have a couple of hypotheses. Let's see what you think. The first one is that people from the outside of basically any hobby just don't understand the depth, right? If you're not a basketball player and you watch an NBA game and you see Steph Curry like just sinking threes, you're like, oh, he's really good. But if you like play basketball and have been following the NBA for a while, you know that he's not just good. There's like a different level of generational talent for being able to do something that is insane at like a super high level consistently among the best players in the world. Like, and so, but if you're on the outside, it just looks like he's pretty good, right? So that's like a reason number one. It's just you underestimate what a native is. The second reason just being it gets talked about a lot. Like a lot of people say they want to be native level, so you do too. And then the third one that I think is really real, especially like I felt it, was that if you only speak your native language, the only language you speak is at a native level. So you don't really want to go into a hobby aiming for like half the ability that you already have, right? If your first language is Spanish, you're not going to go, oh, I want to be way worse at Spanish than my native language. Because like, that's just a weird way. Like you might understand that inside like your head and realize like, yeah, I'm never going to be better at Spanish than English, obviously. But it's hard to like say that because it's a strange thing to say, right? I want to be worse at this thing that I'm trying to get good at. Is just odd. So that's why I think that there's this sort of fixation on native level, native ability sort of thing. But I'd be curious to know what you think.
I think a lot of people just have a perfectionist mindset, where it's like, it annoys me when I make mistakes, and I don't want to.
That's fair.
And sometimes, like, yes, I can let it go when I'm like in the middle of a conversation, but like if I'm writing, especially if I'm like doing corrected writing where I have a tool telling me when I'm making mistakes, like it annoys me constantly that I am making mistakes. And that is true in English as well. I have like a perfectionist mindset in English, and I have to like put it on hold a lot in many things in my life. Because at the end of the day, if you can get to a comfortable conversational level, that's probably enough for most people.
That's pretty great. That's awesome.
It's great. It's fantastic.
Yeah.
Like, everyone in the world will be impressed.
I would be impressed. And I learn languages for a living.
Yeah. Like a comfortable level of fluency is very impressive.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of people, I've made this joke a few times where like, you've heard of Couch to 5K, the app?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. So I've made the joke that like people come into language learning saying like, I want to be a native speaker, I want to sound like a native speaker. And I'm like, okay, that's like going from couch to gold at the Olympics, right? Like
Exactly.
it is a level of commitment that is so far beyond what the average person has ever done in their life. I think it's a level of obsession required to get to that level. So that's my 2 cents on that. You don't need to be perfectionist about it. Choose an achievable goal, and if you don't feel like you need to be native speaker, then don't let the world pressure you into it.
Yeah, you do you. Language learning is an awesome hobby. I have a ton of fun with it, and I hope that you do too. Whatever your goals are, even if your goal is to be able to say hello in 50 languages, go for it.
Not my goal, but go for it.
No, I mean, me neither, but you know, some people do like to be able to say hi to somebody in
Each
their
their
native
own.
language. Can be cool.